good stuff, and tell us about Riverwood and whatever else.
Thank you. Anyone ever find themselves that you look back after you've been tagged to do something volunteer-wise and you go, oh my God, what did I get into? Well, this dates back to actually, I think it was your Fall Guy presentation when Deanna and Steve Carl go, we've got an opportunity. Avalon's probably, we ought to go buy Avalon. And I sat there and I go, it's like, no problem. We'd actually considered it before and everything. It's like, look, just give me 25 million bucks, we'll make it happen. And they go, ha ha ha. And I'm like, well, I'm not really kidding. I mean, that's really what we're gonna need. And they go, just see what you can do. And so, in case anyone didn't know, Avalon was, well, sorry, let me back up a little bit, just for everyone I think knows about the 830G rules in Connecticut, where if we don't have at least 10% deeded affordable housing, which is set at least 80% SMI, which means state median income, as opposed to area median income, which is how all other housing, affordable housing things are judged. So if you took a area, we have Fairfield County. Instead, we take the state, which is all of Connecticut. So anyone have any wild guesses to which is higher? So it's ridiculously low for what has to happen, which makes it, of course, economically unfeasible. So because the state also realized the fact that there's no possibility that we will actually get there in anything, probably in a lifetime, they still wanted to encourage communities. So if you got 1% there, you'd get a 4-year moratorium, which would make sure that no developer could come in and do a cram down project ignoring local zoning. So we tried over the years. We've done Millport, which took 40 units total, and ended up turning those into 113 units. And we took Canaan Parish, which was 60, and turned them into 100 units. In addition, there's also the South Avenue Cottage, which has, I believe, 42, 43, something like that units. Or it's not the South Avenue Cottage, it's the schoolhouse apartments. And then there's a couple under the South Avenue Cottage, but really we're around 240, 250 or something, and we need to get to 750. Some towns, and because it's going out publicly, we won't name them individually, but some of our neighbors, we've tried to meet with other housing authorities and saying, like, what are you trying to do in order to help mitigate the possible effects of 830G? And basically, none of the other towns are doing anything, with the exception of Greenwich, which is really kind of modified their zoning rules, some of which in ways that make sense and kind of streamlining and expediting. I still don't see exactly how it's legal what they're doing, because it's a different sort of opaque process as opposed to our typical process where everything is out in the open, everything's debated by everybody and everything. So New Canaan's a little bit unique, that we've actually really kind of developed a strategy saying, look, we want to be able to control our own destiny, so we will go ahead and we will institute a policy where we're going to try to get rolling moratoriums that'll protect us from other developers while hopefully the rules change. Now, toward the end, I'll get into a little bit as to what the state has planned for us, but what we didn't really anticipate is the rules would get much worse, and that's actually what's on the docket. Now we'll go back to Avalon. So currently, we have a 4-year moratorium in place that comes off of Canaan Parish, and that started just over about a year and a half ago. So we got 2.5 more years of a moratorium. We're 20 units short, and this is approximately 20 units because there's different categories as to how many points you get depending what rates you use and all of these things. But we need about 20 more units to get another moratorium. Doing these type projects is really complicated, really difficult, and they take a lot of time. And I think we're done with the non-controversial ones. Renovating Millport, it was not a good place to begin with, and so renovating, and everyone says this is great. Renovating Canaan Parish, it really needed to be renovated. We had like 2 people speak against it, and all the thing in Canaan. I mean, I don't think you can actually do anything without only 2 people speak against something. So those 2 were relatively easy. Now there aren't a whole lot of really easy ones to do. So if you're going to go ahead and do affordable housing, you've got to go ahead and you got to create density. You've got to have time, and you got to spend a lot of money. Because there's no such, affordable housing is really just who is going to pay how much of someone else's housing bill. The people who own the land, they're not giving it away. People who build stuff, we have to eat too. I mean, everyone has to eat. We don't want the carpenters or electricians working for free. Banks need to get paid on loans, all of that stuff. And then you're going to charge a really reduced rent. And that means that economically, this doesn't work unless somebody shows up with a giant pile of cash. The federal government has something called low-income housing tax credits, and they essentially can provide somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of the hard cost of construction. So not land, not design, but the hard cost of construction. So that's very helpful.
To whom do they give that 30%?
No, to the developer. They give it to the developer for whatever affordable units there are. However, that doesn't come close to covering the difference. I mean, we're talking about like the rent probably covers a third of the cost of actually building. So there, again, there's giant gaps as to what happens. So doing a 20-unit development, by the way, takes probably about as much time to plan and implement and make happen as doing a 60, 80, or 100-unit development. So as you plan resources, I mean, doing a lot of small ones is really resource intensive, whereas doing bigger ones is easier, but of course bigger ones are much more disruptive. So now we get back to Avalon, and something that happens with Avalon is you're like, well, it's gonna cost a lot of money, but it's cost a lot of money anyway. Time-wise, well, it's already built. And density-wise, it's already built. So the three things that are very difficult about affordable housing, Avalon actually solves two of them. It turns out under the cost of Avalon, we ended up buying for roughly the equivalent cost of what it would take for us to build new. And depending on land costs, maybe we got a little discount, maybe we ended up paying a little premium. But trying to make this deal happen was extremely difficult. It turned out that one of the big blessings that we had is Chuck Berman, and I don't know if you guys know Chuck, but Chuck was the head of the Housing Authority before I was, and he was responsible as sort of the head guy, lead developer role in doing Millport and getting Canaan Parish started. And I was sort of the builder guy underneath him. It was wonderful working with them. And developers are a special breed, and they are crazy, and just in a really good way. I mean, I'd go in there, and a number of times I went in to see Chuck, and I said, Chuck, that's impossible. And he goes, no, we'll make this happen. I go, no, it's impossible. He goes, just don't worry about it. And he'd make it happen. And you're like, all right. So I learned a ton from him, and it was just really great. Chuck also used to run Avalon. So even when you start up this idea about we ought to go ahead and buy New Canaan Avalon, I mean, what's your next step? Hello, Avalon, can I talk to the chairman and see if I can buy your, I don't know. However, if you call Chuck Berman, Chuck knows a lot of people at Avalon. And so you get right up to the top in order to see what's going on. And Avalon said, yes, we'll be, let's talk about this. And Avalon, so meanwhile, Avalon's getting out of Connecticut, so they're selling Darien and Wilton. They're selling Darien first, then New Canaan, then Wilton. It was good that Darien was being sold, because if you're gonna do a private transaction, how do you know the price is right? Very difficult. Unless you have a very similar property that goes up for public auction, and you have 22 bidders, all of whom come in within a range of a 5 to a 5.5 cap, just depending how you actually calculate everything and what you're putting the assessments to. And so we could easily agree upon a 5.25 cap, which is essentially, if you invert that, you end up paying roughly 20 times what the income is. And that's the price, and the guy that bought Darien said, I'll be happy to do the exact same thing on New Canaan. So it's like, well, that's the price. So that's easy to, and all cash, 30 days, no contingencies. So they gave us a deal that we would end up having 120 days, I think it might have been 160, but a very tight timeline, and it had to be confidential, and there could be no contingencies. So ideally what would have happened is this would have been a great thing. We'd go in front of all of the boards in New Canaan, we'd go through the process, we could issue town bonds, everything would be out there, we'd hash this all out in public. But anyone think that could happen in 120 days? I mean, it's not even close. And not to mention, it could be referendum. Now, housing authorities are a separate entity from the town. So housing authorities have our own bonding capabilities. We don't have to do anything with the town. I can operate entirely independently, and people will loan me money. So in any event, and the reality is we're loaning on New Canaan real estate, so it's like, well, that's a pretty good asset to be loaning on. So we then had to go ahead and figure out whether or not this was even possible, because I mean, Housing Authority had a couple $1 million. We could probably tap the town for a few $1 million more, but again, if you hit a certain limit, then all of it is public and all of it is referendumable. And so we had to do this really cheap. Turns out that there's a bond that's known as a Fannie Mae Essential Housing Bond, where Fannie Mae offers up these bonds where housing authorities can borrow the money at a credit enhanced rate, which at the time was 4.8-ish. And so if you're buying at 5.25 and you're borrowing at 4.8, you're like, well, I've actually got a spread. I'm going to make money on this. And they loan up to 80% of the value, which is like, we're in business. This is the best deal that has ever come across things. Well, for the next, we'll call it the next, 3 to 4 months, that's when Fannie Mae continually figured out how the new Canaan Housing Authority was different from the only other entity that ever used this bond, which was the LA Housing Authority. I'm not kidding. And they figured it out in increments. And the increments were literally like, if you lose 2% today, you lose 4% here, you lose 5%, here's more restrictions, here's more restrictions. And then meanwhile, our subordinate bonds then of course become a larger portion, a larger stack out of this. And the subordinate debt was supposed to be at about 6, and it was slowly rising up to about 6.8, which was tricky. And there's other restrictions, which I won't get into, that are too obscure, but it makes it very hard to make this work. So about a week before the non-refundable $1 million deposit had to go down with Avalon, where there's no backing out of this thing, our subordinate bond guy comes back and goes, well, actually, market really doesn't kind of like this one. It's going to be at 9.2, and you got to give parts of equity. And you're like, this isn't a small miss. This is something really catastrophic. And so we faced this was the first serious, there's no way this deal can happen. But with no time or anything else involved, we literally sat there and go, well, let's test how the people of New Canaan feel about this. And so without any deliberate marketing materials, without all the other stuff, we started dialing for dollars. And within about a week and a half, we actually got commitments from individuals in town for around $15 to $20 million. So, as I'll read,
It's a great bummer.
around six-ish.
It's a great
Good rate.
So with that, luckily, we didn't need to actually use that because we ended up finding a separate one, which Bob Spangler, who was a member of Royal Bank of Canada, actually does this. And through our calling around, somebody reminded us that it's like, have you talked to Bob? And you're like, I need to talk to Bob. And Bob figured out how to do it inside of his group, which again, this was not a slam dunk, because we were leveraging this thing about as high as you could possibly leverage something. And Bob was able to work it through at the end of the day. But the heartache there, again, more of that later. But so we were able to actually, again, with the support of the town, we said, okay, this gives us at least the thought process that we can go ahead and do this and carry it off if we have to. Now, you don't want to actually have like 10 high net worth individuals who you're trying to agree upon all the bond terms as you're going into a deal and stuff. So again, luckily we didn't have to do that, but very few communities can you actually do that on short notice and have people actually step up to the plate and say, I'm in. So that was really spectacular. Around that same time, if you're a housing authority and you're buying a piece of property for affordable housing, you have to have a public hearing. So how do you have a public hearing if it's all confidential? So we got permission from Avalon to have the public hearing, and we did it around this time, and because this was the right time, and so it was not intentional, but we're going, good thing it's late August, so hopefully this will be okay. Well, we had about 120 people show up. And so you show up, and we're up at the front dais in town hall, and if you want a real surreal experience, sit up in front of a town meeting, gavel it to order, and go, so Federal Housing Authority requires that we end up going ahead and having this meeting and disclosing this, and so we're considering buying the piece of property known as this whatever, and we're under confidentiality agreements. We're here to listen. You look around, and again, everyone's like, what? And so some people did come up and speak, and again, it was rather traumatic for some of the residents, because you don't know if the whole property is being converted into affordable housing, or you're gonna get kicked out in 2 months, how is this gonna work? And literally, as they came up and speak, emotional pleas, and go, thank you. That's it. Luckily, our own Tom Butterworth ended up coming up, and Tom says, like, look, I'm from our town council. I have no information on this deal, but let me tell you about affordable housing, what I know about it. And Tom basically spelled out the entire plan of what we were trying to do. And it's like, and I'm just sitting there going, so we did not violate confidentiality. We were able to get some information out there that hopefully was of use to, again, the people who were living there and making everybody feel better. So again, sort of fast forwarding forward, the deal continues to change, things continue to morph and move. We're doing calls like consistently, the deal dies, we find a way to resurrect it, they put in some sort of a poison pill, you find a way around it, you go through this stuff. And it's crazy. I mean, we're going, like 3 phone calls a weekend, 1 a day during the other stuff. And meanwhile, a vendor had asked me to go play golf up in Vermont at a couple different places at the end of October. And that was like 2 weeks after the close. And I'm going, you know, I'm gonna need this. So I said yes. Well, the clothes keep pushing. Literally, I'm driving up to Vermont, and the deal has now died, you know, every day it dies and somehow we resurrect it. As we're driving up to Vermont, it dies, resurrected, then it dies permanently. There's an insurmountable obstacle. It's absolutely impossible. It was just, literally these things come down to the point where like for $500,000 or $1 million, it's it. No, everyone's like, well, someone else has to come up with the money. And by the way, if it's the wrong person, then that violates another covenant, so then this other person's out. I should say along the way, all the boards, all the selectmen, all the people we went in front of, town council and all, everybody saw the wisdom of this, and everyone went ahead and was again, very supportive. There was just a ton of support among the whole community that was in the know. And again, we kept it as tight as possible, but in town, some people have to know. I mean, it's just, we can't have it without having that. And actually back to Board of Finance, I went to Board of Finance. If you know our Board of Finance, real serious people. You don't go in front of them and sit there and ask for money without, you know, having a really good reason and a great story. And I literally came in and said, this is what we're planning. I don't need this right now, but I think I might need this, and so I'm gonna need $5 million. I don't know how I'm gonna pay it back. Don't know what I'm gonna use it for. And after some great debate on the part of the finance, they finally came up and said, $4 million, we're in. And again, that I don't know if that's ever happened in the Board of Finance. I mean, which again shows the support and the vision of everybody involved in doing this. And of course, the $1 million didn't matter until I was driving up to Vermont. I'm going, yep, it was 5. That's what we needed to make this happen. And so over the next day and a half, while like I'm playing golf and pulling out from holes and doing other calls and stuff, figured out a way in order to get it to come back to life one more time. And then it ended up closing. And you're going, it's like, this is nuts. So I finally, like again, one of the key players was Greg Burton, who's with Mike Sweeney's firm, Permanent Torrance. He had come to us very early and had become our lawyer. And again, without him, this would have been impossible. He was spectacular. And it just so happened that he's up in New Haven. And so as I'm driving back down, I just had to go sign some final papers. And I show up in his office and finally actually meet him face to face after having spent like 50 hours with him on the phone and stuff. And I said this, Greg, I thought I'm really good at stress and complexity and stuff. And I mean, this almost killed me. And he just laughed and he said, it's like, Scott, the typical deal is about this complicated. I mean, a really complicated deal is about like this. This deal was somewhere around here. And so with around $4 million worth of actual cash in, we closed a $75 million deal that actually had another $2 million in expenses. So it's one of those like, okay. And in the meantime, we're still trying to convert over some of the units. We do have to convert 20 of the units to 80% AMI, which will not help us for the 830G, but we don't need it to help us for the 830G right now. However, in like 2.5 years, if we do need those units, then we're gonna have to come up with somewhere in the neighborhood of around $400,000 to $500,000 per unit to convert them over. And that again is the level of the difference between an SMI unit and a market rate unit. But at least we can do it. And so that's a good part.
Who would come up with that?
So, Tom, funny you should ask.
Taxpayers.
The taxpayer should. I mean, Housing Authority, if we get the project operating the way it should, we should be able to have some money, but not a whole ton of it, because we're trying to go. Because also, anyone ever been in a real estate deal, like buying your own house or something, you do all the careful inspections. What happens the day you move in? Something starts to break. And we're having some of that down at our property too, and so we have higher maintenance costs than we would have expected. Because the deal took longer and Avalon lost their manager, we have a little bit higher vacancy rate than we'd like and stuff, and so it's a challenge running that.
So what did happen to the existing residents?
Kick them all out. No, no, and nothing changed for anybody.
Oh, wow.
Not a single thing, and it's not going to, because it's again, we have to convert 21 units to AMI units. We will convert those units to SMI, which gets us pretty much to where we need to be. So there's possibility that 20 AMI people may be affected by this in 2 to 2.5 years. The other 80, we don't care. Nothing happens. They stay exactly as it is. Life keeps going on. John?
Can you go over the economics again? Because you talked about Canaan Parish, a renovation, and but it was really new construction, 100 units.
Canaan Parish was 100%.
Okay, new construction, 100 units, but you owned the land. Compare that to the 105 units of Avalon for 75 million. So I'm doing the math and I'm thinking it's about a $725,000 per door cost. What was the per door cost of Canaan Parish? And what would it be if we were gonna go do the next one?
So, as I've learned with affordable housing things, there's no such thing as a simple question. Because Fannie Mae has more rules, and apparently the Doge guys are actually going through an AI that's going through all the regulations and trying to cut them in half because so many don't apply. And Fannie has so many, it's unbelievable. So Canaan Parish, we don't actually own the land. We have a land lease from the town of New Canaan. And that's at, I think, $1 a year, I don't know, it's $1 a year or something for 40 or 99 years or something like that. At Riverwood, now we actually own the land. So that again is an added expense. And by the way, if we went anywhere else in New Canaan, there's a couple places you might be able to sneak in, 20 to 40 unit developments, but if we were looking for the same type of land, we'd have to buy that land too, and that would be a cost. I don't know if anyone knows what the cost of that type land would be. Canaan Parish, I believe that we were in it somewhere in the neighborhood of just about $450,000 to $500,000 per door, and that was just before construction costs exploded. So depending what you throw in and how you figure things, somewhere in the $600,000 to $800,000 per unit is what we think it would cost per door, and that may or may not include land, depending how that's played.
Did Canaan Parish have low-income housing tax credit equity money into it?
So Canaan Parish was actually, people will sit there and say Canaan Parish should be like just the poster child of every single housing development one. I mean, affordable housing, it was a gorgeous project. Look at how this is, it's awesome. It's a total unicorn. They have 60 Section 8 project-based vouchers. So Section 8 means that if you earn $100 a month, $30 goes to your housing. You pay $30 to your housing. If market rate is, let's say, $1,030, then the government pays the other $1,000 a month. So essentially, you get near market rates for all the apartments, which changes the economics tremendously. So we essentially, in an affordable housing project, and we have 60 units that are essentially market rate from the developer's point of view. So that's a huge, huge plus. I don't think, I forget if we did get, I think we did get, yeah, we did get low-income house tax credits with Canaan Parish, some of those.
Which again, it drives down the leverage.
Correct.
You got cash.
And then you also, Canaan Parish was, so at Millport, we had to relocate a handful of tenants while we were doing the redevelopment. It is unbelievably expensive. We had actually bought, if you recall, in between Millport and the doctor's offices, there used to be a couple of properties. We bought those. They were market rate. We never claimed anything under affordable, nothing under this stuff. We banked them and we rented them while they were before our development. Turns out that if you were a housing authority and you were going to redevelop, whether you've called it affordable or not, those tenants have rights, and we ended up having to pay like $30,000 to $50,000 to get them to move each. And then relocating the other tenants was a big problem at Millport. And if you can picture like at Canaan Parish, if we had to relocate 60 families, where do you put 60 families? Where do you find 60 apartments? I don't even know what you do. And by the way, that's probably a $2.5, $3, $4 million deal trying to relocate them during that time. We were able to do Canaan Parish in 2 steps, where we had traded out the families as people left. We did not refill them. We were able to keep a bunch of them working, did phase 1, moved people into phase 1, tore down the old buildings, did the other one. So we had, like $50,000 in relocation expenses, literally moving people from their apartment into the building, as opposed to, again, millions of dollars. So that's one of the issues that comes up when you try to compare. Like if we were to go ahead and convert all of Avalon, or Riverwood, I mean, I don't know how you can do it with, what you have to do to get the tenants out. And if you've ever read Caro's The Power Broker, you learn why some of these rules exist, but they've been actually pushed to an extreme that makes it very difficult to do anything else.
I've read recently that the town has hired a consulting firm to look at the lumberyard and other possible places to put more affordable housing. Is there any consideration given to the town leasing the property to developers who then could put in multi-use apartments, offices, that kind of stuff?
So one of my least favorite moments inside of public service was serving with Judy Bentley on the Senior Housing Commission. And as we were looking at places for senior housing, you know, the state actually had a program where they would give you like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 grants to study the availability of housing in places near transit. We go, this is great, let's go ahead and get the grant. We've always wondered what can we do over at the railroad station. Let's take free money in order to see what we can do. There were torches and pitchforks and barrels of tar and feathers that came out at the mere concept that anyone would ever touch that lot and do anything with it. We're like, we're not even trying to touch the lot. We just want to get some money to figure out if we can do something. And I will say that from my own perspective, I mean, New Canaan exists because of New York. Right, New Canaan in its present condition exists because of New York City. And also, if you look at certain towns like Westport, like I think we've all experienced in Westport, occasionally you drive around Westport and you're going, I'm leaving because there is not a parking space within a mile of where I want to go. So the fact that the lumberyard actually has parking, and again, you can develop stuff on top of what would be parking, you can be multi-level. You know, I refer back also that if you look at the Norman Rockwell paintings of cute New England towns, you remember all of those with 4 acres of blacktop with cars parked in them? No. So there's got to be a higher and better use for it. What that will be is a big question mark, and that's going to take a lot. I believe it'll take the town a long time to figure out what's the right thing to do, and we only get one shot at it. You know, once that asset's developed, it's developed, and that's it. So we do have to get it right, whatever is decided. And if you have a developer, one of the tricks under if a developer does affordable housing, at most you're gonna get like 30% affordable. So using the comparison, if Housing Authority were to develop 100% affordable, we need to get to our 10%, we need 5 more Avalons spread out somewhere in town. 5 more. If a developer did it, we need to get 15, 18 more. And you're like, ooh, that's a lot of units. A lot of units. So, but again, there's no question we have to look at that, and that's an underutilized resource, except for the farmers one.
Yeah.
Scott, you mentioned converting these units from AMI to SMI or SMI to AMI,
Yeah.
whichever way, AMI to SMI. Is that physically converting them? Making
It's
it
a
different, or is
deed.
it just a
It's a
legal
deed, and
thing?
then making sure you have the right people.
Does the person who's in that apartment at the moment, who's paying AMI, does he get a reduction in rent because now it's SMI?
The SMI has to be based on the individual. Right now, we have some flexibility on AMI is to put it up to the rent, which is good, because there's another problem here, that the state has determined that New Canaan must have their fair share of this SMI units. Well, at SMI, I think you end up having, at 60% SMI, I think you're like at $1,500, $1,600 a month for a 1-bedroom, like $2,000 for a 2. There's a lot of people who, and by the way, you can't make more than like 85. So, or 65 or 70, I forget the exact numbers in this, but, so I'm looking for someone who makes between like $70,000 and $80,000, who's willing to pay this amount of money, who wants to live in New Canaan, and you're like, you know, the rental pool is this big. And for a long time at Millport, we had a problem filling Millport. The 1-bedrooms, the 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms go very quickly due to the schools, but the 1-bedrooms are hard to fill. So that's a tricky part about the conversions. Sorry, keep.
I remember working in 1983 on L. Smith's lumberyard plan, which I got all the drawings in the office, all the structurals for underground parking, and we built a model of it. I have photographs of the model. And when we presented it, it filled the high school auditorium, and the fire marshal was turning people away. So.
Well, especially because they were bringing torches. Amy?
Can you explain what this Riverwood gives us in the way of moratorium?
So
And
it
then
did-
also, can I just ask another question about what does Arnold Karp's various projects do in the way of moratorium?
So I would refer that Riverwood gives us a bank account of apartments that we can quickly turn into affordable units to make sure we get our next moratorium. So we don't have to do it now.
After 2.5 years, then that's what we would look to.
The next in 2.5 years, if Arnold actually gets approved and builds what he's gonna build, and he builds it as he says, there's 30 units in there. Those 30 units get us across it. So Riverwood, we don't have to touch for another 4 years. And then in the meantime, if other people have done other developments, maybe there's another 20, 30, 40, maybe there's a whole nother moratorium. So we don't touch Riverwood for another 8 years. So we've got something that's a self-supporting inventory of units that can be converted very quickly into those, which hopefully also discourages developers, because it's like, you come up with a terrible development for us, we will come up with the money to make sure we keep moratoriums going. So in other words, it's, well, you got your terrible development, see you in 6, 7, 8 years, which hopefully discourages them from coming up with a bad idea. Right, Leo, one last one, and then we're.
I just wanted to point out the difference between the housing authority owning or building an affordable housing unit versus a developer building one under 830G, because those units Arnold will build only last for 30 years, whereas these are permanent. So there's units that were built under 830G, because the law is like 40 years old, I think now, that are falling off, and they're losing more units in the state than they're adding. It's such a terrible rule.
And then there's fair share housing, which is coming out, which we won't even touch on. That makes 830G look like a piker regulation. And oh, by the way, they're not turning that down.
Remember, next week, we're at the First Presby Church Common Room. I'll send that announcement so nobody comes here.
Across from the Roger Church.
Yes, across from the church. Have a good week.